The sun beat down harshly on the marble driveway of the palatial mansion in Lekki Phase 1, but the heat paled in comparison to the searing humiliation etched into Amaka's chest. She stood stiffly at the entrance, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her headscarf slightly tilted after her husband, Nonso, had shoved her out with a cold finality that still stung. The security guard stood frozen by the side, unsure whether to intervene or keep pretending like they didn't hear the shouting. The house behind her, once filled with love, laughter, and dreams, now echoed with her husband's venom. "Amaka, leave my house." I said leave. "You're a disgrace. You've got no style, no polish. I can't be seen with you anymore." He didn't lower his voice. He didn't care that the maids, the gateman, the new driver, and even the neighbors' children playing nearby could hear. Her dignity was stripped publicly, and Nonso didn't blink. His new girlfriend, the ever-glam Temi, stood behind him smugly at the door, dressed in designer shorts, watching like she was waiting for a slot to spit next. Amaka's heart pounded, not in confusion, but in bitter clarity. So this was how it would end? The man she had once stood beside, when he couldn't afford his mother's medication, was now kicking her out of a mansion she helped build? Not with her money, but with her guidance, her prayers, her connections, and her loyalty. But Nonso had conveniently forgotten all of that. Now that his ego was fed by luxury and public validation, Amaka was suddenly too sloppy for his new lifestyle. With her wrapper loosely tied around her waist and her feet in worn-out slippers, she looked nothing like the women he now craved. Those who posted soft life videos in Dubai and lived for brunches and six. But she didn't care. What stung wasn't that he kicked her out. It was that he thought she had nowhere to go. That she had no one. That she was just Amaka, the wife he picked from Enugu. He didn't know that behind that name was a different identity, one buried for peace, one that owned far more than the land his mansion stood on. He didn't know that the woman he just discarded like torn Ankara was, in fact, a silent billionaire who could buy and sell his entire life if she so chose. But Amaka didn't raise her voice. She didn't scream. She simply walked away and smiled. The one-bedroom flat in Surulere smelled faintly of dust and old furniture, a far cry from the polished marble floors and imported scents of the Lekki mansion. The ceiling fan whirred noisily, threatening to fall apart, but Amaka didn't flinch. She had paid 6 months' rent in cash, no questions asked, no documents signed with her real name. The landlord, a weary-faced man in his 50s, didn't recognize her from the billboards or magazine pages she once anonymously funded as an angel investor. To him, she was just another quiet woman, moving in with one worn Gana-must-go bag and a stack of old clothes. The room had no television, no AC, and no wardrobe. Just a mattress on the floor and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. But for the first time in years, Amaka felt calm. The silence here was better than the luxury that screamed betrayal. She sat on the mattress and exhaled, deep, heavy, cleansing. Her fingers slid into her bag and pulled out her old Nokia burner phone. Not the iPhone Nonso bought to spy on her, but the one she kept hidden. She flipped it open, typed a code, and the screen blinked to life with a name only few in the country knew. Mirabelle Chukwananai. Not Amaka. Not Mrs. Nonso, but the daughter of a late oil tycoon Obiagala Chukwananai, the same man who left behind hidden billions tied up in trusts and global ventures, away from public eyes. She hadn't touched that identity in years. She wanted love to find her without wealth. And in Nonso, she thought she did. She met him when he was just a hustling supply chain manager, running errand contracts and begging for capital. He was smart, charming, but desperate. She loved that about him, his hunger. She gave him her time, her body, her prayers, and quietly, her backing. The first contract he won came from a connection her father's lawyer subtly pushed through. Nonso never knew, and Amaka never told. Because she didn't want gratitude. She wanted partnership. But with every million he made, he forgot. With every new car, every new deal, he morphed. The same humility that drew her to him became dust beneath his red-bottom shoes. And now he had kicked her out for not fitting in with his new life. She didn't cry. Instead, she stood up from the mattress, walked to the window, and looked out at the small children playing football in the red sand street below. A different world, yes, but one where she was in control again. She picked up her phone, dialed a long-secured number, and waited. The voice on the other end answered almost immediately. "Chairwoman," it said. "Are we back in business?" She smiled. "It's time." The sleek black SUV rolled quietly into the basement parking of the Novacor Tower in Victoria Island. From the outside, no one would suspect the lone woman stepping out in plain Ankara trousers, and a silk blouse was one of Nigeria's richest hidden figures. Amaka, no Mirabelle, adjusted her scarf and walked briskly past the security guard who opened the glass door without a second glance. Her fingerprints unlocked the elevator, and once inside, she pressed the code that accessed the restricted floor. The elevator chimed, and the doors parted to reveal a penthouse office untouched for years. The glass walls offered a commanding view of the city skyline, but Mirabelle didn't pause to admire it. She walked straight to the mahogany desk, pressed her palm against the biometric scanner, and waited. Within seconds, the control panel blinked green, and the room lit up. The dormant nerve center of her late father's empire, now awake again. The monitors came to life, displaying real-time dashboards of dormant assets, offshore trusts, unclaimed dividends, and shell corporations spanning Dubai, London, Nairobi, and Johannesburg. For years, she had remained in the shadows, letting trusted trustees oversee the daily operations while she lived a quiet life as Amaka the wife. But that mask had fallen now. Nonso's arrogance had set something in motion that couldn't be undone. She opened the first drawer and pulled out a document marked Obiagela Legacy Directive. It was her father's last wish, appointing her as the chairwoman of the entire Novacor conglomerate, with powers activated only upon her digital confirmation. She stared at the login screen, the cursor blinking, and then she typed, "Mirabelle, oh, Chukwunani, access granted." An assistant entered, a bespectacled man in his early 30s with a calm demeanor. "Ma, should we alert the board?" Mirabelle turned to face him, her voice calm but commanding. "No, not yet. Quietly begin liquidation of shell company Camberwave. That's the one holding the Lekki Mansion title." "Yes, Ma." "And have our legal team review every business entity tied to Nonso Okonkwo." "Yes, Chairwoman." She smiled faintly at the title. It no longer felt strange. It felt right. Nonso stood in the center of his grand living room in Lekki, holding a champagne glass in one hand and Temmie's waist in the other, laughing louder than anyone else in the room. The house was full, socialites, influencers, politicians' sons, and a few media personalities who had no idea they were about to witness the rise and fall of a man intoxicated by his own ego. To freedom. Nonso toasted, raising his glass. To real women. The room roared in support, with Temmie flashing her perfect teeth as she leaned into him, whispering sweet nothings. He looked around proudly, seeing everything as his achievement. The chandelier he didn't pay for, the imported furniture Amaka selected, the artworks her connections delivered. To him, she was gone and forgotten. She didn't belong here, he said smugly. She was never fit for this life. No one corrected him. Not one soul dared to remind him that the woman he ridiculed had built the foundation he now danced on. Because the world only respects visible power, not silent sacrifice. Meanwhile, across town, Mirabelle sat in a quiet meeting room, the air cool with intention. A digital presentation glowed in front of her, listing corporate acquisition targets across Nigeria's booming tech and logistics sectors. Her strategy was simple: consolidate power without noise. Novacor Holdings, long considered dormant, had returned, but not with press conferences or media blasts. No, Mirabelle was working through shadows, buying up key logistics and transport businesses that Nonso's newest venture, Swift Move Logistics, relied on for third-party partnerships. One by one, she began controlling the arteries of his empire. She wasn't out for revenge. She was setting boundaries, with a Billionaire pen. Her assistant slid a document across the table. The Lekki Mansion. Once Camberwave is liquidated, it reverts fully to Novacor's real estate division. Shall we proceed? She paused for a moment. Not out of hesitation, but calculation. Not yet, she said. Let him enjoy the illusion of ownership a little longer. It's always sweeter when it vanishes overnight. Her board members didn't laugh. They knew this wasn't pettiness, it was discipline. The difference between noise and legacy. While Nonso partied, Mirabelle planned. While he danced with a borrowed crown, she quietly reforged the throne. Nonso paced through the master bedroom in nothing but boxers and a gold chain, his phone glued to his ear as he barked at his project manager. How can you tell me the shipment is delayed again? I'm losing clients, I'm losing money. What am I even paying you for? He didn't wait for an answer. He ended the call and hurled the phone onto the king-size bed. Temmie, lounging nearby in his silk robe, rolled her eyes. You've been shouting all morning. It's Sunday, babe. Calm down. He ignored her. Something had been off lately. His business was bleeding silently. Partnerships were dissolving, and subcontractors were either withdrawing or asking for outrageous fees. Yet no one could trace the cause. Every investigation came up clean, yet the noose kept tightening. At first, he blamed mismanagement, then market fluctuations. But deep inside, an unsettling fear was forming, like something larger, more precise, was coming for him. And now, to top it off, he had just received a letter from a property registrar. A legal one. It had stated, without ambiguity, that the title of the house he lived in was not in his name, had never been in his name. It belonged to Camberwave Realty Holdings, which was being liquidated by Novacor Group. Novacor? Who the hell are they? He muttered, reading the letter again. Why would a tech investment firm care about a residential property? Across Lagos, Mirabelle sat in a sunlit garden in Ikoyi, sipping zobo from a crystal glass. Her hair was braided back neatly, and she wore a soft linen kaftan that moved with the breeze. The smile on her face wasn't smug, it was serene. Her lawyer sat beside her, documents laid out on the marble table. We've completed the paperwork. Once the liquidation finalizes, the property will automatically transfer to Novacor Assets. We can initiate a 14-day notice or have it locked down immediately. Your call. Mirabelle didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the gate, remembering the day she drove up to that mansion with Nonso for the first time. He had no idea she had bought it through Camberwave, an entity registered years before they met. It was supposed to be their home, but she didn't want him to feel small, so she let him believe he paid for it. She smiled faintly, the weight of all that trust gone. Wait, she said finally. Let's give him 10 more days. Let him plan another party. Let him post another caption. Then let the door shut. Her lawyer nodded. Very well. As she signed the papers, her hand was steady. There was no revenge here, just justice wearing a silk glove. Mirabelle entered the Novacor Holdings main tower in Victoria Island not through the front, but via the executive tunnel that connected to the underground garage, a corridor reserved for only one person, the chairwoman. Her staff, now fully briefed, moved with discipline. Phones were kept away. Eyes stayed down. No leaks. No press. That was how she wanted it. For years, she had lived in quiet loyalty, suppressing the Billionaire fire burning within her just to keep her marriage from collapsing under the weight of her truth. But now that love had spat her out like sour fruit, silence had become her sharpest weapon. In the executive conference room, 12 board members sat upright as she entered. Many had never seen her in person. They had only heard of Mirabelle, the elusive heiress who controlled majority shares but never interfered. Now she stood before them, tall, calm, and unshaken. Good morning, everyone, she began. This is not a welcome-back speech. It's a takeover. Effective immediately, all dormant projects will resume. All dormant power will return. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her presence alone rearranged the air in the room. As she spoke, her assistant distributed sealed folders. Inside them, a dossier titled Operation Silent Storm. Each document outlined the strategic acquisition of 4 key logistics firms, including 2 that supplied core infrastructure to Swift Move Logistics, Nonso's pride and joy. They were small fish compared to Novacor, but vital arteries to his operations. If those arteries tightened, Swift Move would bleed dry. The board members reviewed the plan, nodding slowly. It was genius. Ruthless, but genius. And legal. What happens if Swift Move defaults on the pending contracts? One member asked. Mirabelle turned to him, her voice even. Then we acquire them for scraps. Silence filled the room. She closed her folder and stood. I don't need public revenge. I need corporate correction. This isn't about bitterness. It's about balance. The meeting ended with quiet awe. As she exited, her assistant leaned in. Chairwoman, you have a private call waiting. From Geneva. She nodded, routed through the executive line. As she walked into her private suite, the sun bathed her in gold. She no longer needed to prove anything to Nonso. The world would show him what she was made of, without her ever raising her voice. Nonso sat behind his expansive desk in Swift Move's office, legs crossed, chin high, confidence oozing as he tapped his pen against a proposal document. The government logistics contract was worth over 9 billion Nigerian nairas, and winning it would catapult his company from mid-tier player to elite corporate league. He had made all the right moves, greased the right palms, charmed the selection board, even dropped Temmie's name at a cocktail party to cozy up to a senator's cousin. To him, it was already a done deal. His staff buzzed around the office, fueled by the same arrogance that had now become his trademark. Then, in the middle of a strategy briefing, his secretary walked in nervously, holding an envelope. Sir, this just came in from the procurement board, she said. He snatched it, tore it open, and scanned the short list of final contenders. At the top of the page, in bold, N.O. Viasor Holdings Limited status, cleared for final stage. His smile froze. He blinked, leaned back, and read it again. Novacor? The same Novacor that recently acquired Camberwave? The one that had mysteriously liquidated a string of firms linked to his supply chain? No, this had to be a mistake. He picked up his phone and dialed his consultant. Why is Novacor on this list? They weren't even bidding 3 weeks ago. The consultant hesitated, then replied, they made a late-stage bid through an acquisition clause, bought a firm already shortlisted, and inherited its spot. Nonso's heart dropped. What firm? Vector Logics. The name rang like a bullet through his chest. Vector Logics was his backup vendor. The one he had mocked for being outdated. The one he didn't buy when he had the chance. He dropped the call and leaned back slowly. Across town in the polished boardroom of Novacor Tower, Mirabelle sat across from her operations director, casually reviewing a blueprint of Vector Logics' restructuring plan. The company had been undervalued, mismanaged, and nearly bankrupt, until she bought it in full and injected 3 billion Nigerian nairas. It's official, her director said. Our bid is stronger, our capacity wider, and our delivery track record now unmatched in this category. Mirabelle didn't gloat. She simply asked, have we filed the final documents? Yes, ma. She nodded. Let them see it coming, but not soon enough to stop it. Her gaze drifted toward the glass windows, where the bustling city of Lagos stretched endlessly. Nonso would soon realize that every exit he thought she had, she designed. And every step she was taking now was never revenge. It was a return to who she had always been. Nonso sank into the couch that afternoon with a glass of whiskey in one hand and his laptop balanced on his lap. Temmie was painting her nails by the poolside, scrolling through Instagram stories and snickering at other women's soft life videos. Nonso had barely slept the night before, his mind stuck on Novacor's surprise bid. His entire body was tense, his pride bleeding from a wound he didn't yet understand. He clicked on a YouTube business conference live stream titled, Rising Giants, the Return of Africa's Silent Power Players. He wanted to distract himself, maybe learn something, maybe feel like the king he believed he was. The host, a polished anchor in a navy suit, introduced the next speaker. And now, please welcome the newly reactivated force behind Novacor Holdings, the chairwoman herself, Mirabelle Obiagelu Chukwananai. Nonso froze. The screen flickered. And there she was. Amaka. No, not Amaka. She looked nothing like the woman he had shoved out of his mansion in a wrapper. On screen was a glowing figure dressed in a regal emerald green jumpsuit, her natural hair in a sleek bun, her makeup sharp and minimal, her posture radiant with power. She walked across the stage calmly, confidently, and when she smiled, the entire room stood to applaud. The camera zoomed in, and her name appeared boldly below. Mirabelle Chuckwananai, Chairwoman, Novacor Holdings. Nonso's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the tiled floor. Temi heard the crash and rushed in. What happened? Nonso didn't answer. He couldn't speak. He just pointed at the screen. Temi stared. Wait, isn't that your ex-wife? He nodded slowly, mouth ajar, eyes wide. But her name? She's not Amaka. He shook his head like a child, realizing he'd just failed a test he thought he had written perfectly. Her name is Mirabelle. Meanwhile, on stage, Mirabelle addressed a global audience. We are not in a race for dominance. We are in a race for dignity, for taking back control of what we let slip while we were busy surviving. Her voice was calm, but every word thundered in Nonso's chest. You see, she continued, power is not what you display, it's what you can withhold and still win. She didn't mention his name. She didn't need to. But every viewer watching knew there was a man somewhere shaking. And for the first time since he kicked her out, Nonso felt something deeper than regret. He felt fear. The morning after the conference, Mirabelle's inbox was flooded, not with business inquiries, but with desperate emails from one name she hadn't seen in weeks. Nonso Okonkwo. The subject lines varied. Let's talk. I didn't know. Please, Mirabelle. It's me. Nonso. She didn't open any of them. Her assistant had strict instructions to filter all communication from him to a separate folder labeled noise. Her phone buzzed continuously, unknown numbers, private callers, even voice notes through WhatsApp. One message read, Amaka, please just give me 5 minutes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was blind. Another, please. I just want to hear your voice. But she had nothing to say. And if she did, he wasn't worthy of hearing it. While Nonso spiraled into panic, Mirabelle's life was in full bloom. She was hosting high-level meetings, closing a land deal in Accra, finalizing new warehousing systems in Abuja, and building a corporate alliance with West Africa's largest digital transport firm. Her name was now on everyone's lips, not as someone's wife, but as a self-made force. Across town, Nonso sat alone in his office, his skin pale with dread. His company's quarterly numbers had dipped again, and 3 of his top clients had just pulled out of ongoing partnerships, citing a shift in competitive alignment. He knew what that meant. Novacor, or more specifically, Mirabelle. The same woman he kicked out like yesterday's trash was now outmaneuvering him in boardrooms he didn't even know existed. Temi, his girlfriend, had grown distant too. She scrolled through her phone constantly, comparing herself to the woman now dominating the headlines. She asked fewer questions about his day and smiled less often. Nonso noticed. You're quiet lately, he muttered over dinner. She didn't even look up. I'm just trying to understand how you had that kind of woman and didn't know what to do with her. The insult hit like acid. He dropped his fork. What's that supposed to mean? Temi shrugged. I just think some men are allergic to gold if it doesn't sparkle loud enough. Then she stood up and walked away, leaving him choking on silence. At that moment, Nonso realized it wasn't just business he was losing, it was respect. His ex-wife's quiet rise was echoing louder than his entire empire. And it wasn't that she changed. She simply stopped hiding. The whispers started quietly in Lagos social circles, but by the end of the week, they had become sharp daggers flying in every direction. Did you hear Nonso's ex is the new chairwoman of Novacor? She was the one funding him all along, and he dumped her for Temi? The city was buzzing, and the humiliation cut deeper than any financial loss. Nonso could feel the eyes even when no one was looking. At a friend's birthday soiree in Victoria Island, the tension was palpable. He walked in with Temi on his arm, trying to maintain the illusion of power. But people stared, not with envy, but with curiosity and silent judgment. The air was thick with unspoken truths. One woman whispered behind a flute of champagne, he downgraded. Another chuckled. She was the real boss all along. Temi heard them. She smiled awkwardly but said nothing. Nonso tried to laugh it off, overcompensating with stories of business success, still pretending that Swift Move was thriving. But no one really listened. They were too busy watching him unravel. Meanwhile, Mirabelle was making quiet moves that shook Nonso's world even further. She had just finalized a major share acquisition in Grandel Freight Systems, a firm Nonso depended on for 60% of his warehousing contracts. The transaction was clean, silent, and brutal. Within a week, his partnership agreement was terminated. Legal, final, inevitable. His logistics pipeline began to choke. Deliveries delayed. Clients dropped. His bank manager called, inquiring about a growing deficit. Nonso had gone from golden boy to cautionary tale. In the quiet of her Akoi study, Mirabelle received the daily update file from her legal team. She opened it, scanned the latest developments, and softly chuckled at one line that read, Mr. Okonkwo has requested mediation regarding recent vendor terminations. She closed the file. No need to reply. It was never about vengeance. It was about restoring the balance. He had humiliated her, tossed her out like a liability. Now, without lifting a finger in public or saying her name aloud, she had become his greatest reckoning. The power wasn't in shouting or dragging him online. It was in letting the world connect the dots on their own. And they were. Every client, every friend, every bystander. His pride had made her invisible. Her silence had made her unforgettable. Nonso didn't expect the knock. It was 7:48 a.m. on a Tuesday. He was still in his robe, nursing a bitter cup of coffee while staring blankly at the Swift Move dashboard, which now showed a 34% client drop in less than 4 weeks. Temi was still asleep upstairs. He opened the front door lazily, expecting maybe a package. Instead, he was greeted by 2 well-dressed legal officers in dark suits holding a white envelope. Mr. Nonso Okonkwo, the taller one asked. Yes. Nonso replied, his chest tightening. You are hereby served with an official repossession notice pertaining to this property. Plot 76, Admiralty Crescent, Lekki Phase 1. Nonso blinked rapidly. I don't understand. This is my house. The man handed him the document. It hasn't been your house for a while, sir. According to the official records, this property is owned by Novacor Real Estate Limited. As of today, your occupancy has been revoked due to liquidation of Camberwave Holdings. You have 10 days to vacate, or the locks change without warning. Nonso felt the blood drain from his face. His hand trembled as he shut the door and stumbled backward, ripping open the papers and reading every line like a madman. And there it was, buried in the legal jargon. Primary beneficiary, Mirabelle Obiagula Chukwananai. The walls around him began to spin. He had mocked her in this house, thrown her out barefoot, called her useless, told her she wasn't fit for this life. And now the very floors he walked on were hers. He was never the king. He was a tenant in the palace of a queen. Temi came down the stairs, rubbing her eyes. What's that? She asked. He couldn't even speak. He just sat on the couch, stunned. She read the letter, scoffed, and said, You didn't even own the house? Silence. So, the whole time she owned it? Silence. Wow, Temi whispered. You're not just dumb, you're broke and dumb too. She turned and walked upstairs again. Meanwhile, Mirabelle was at a private breakfast meeting with a property developer in Banana Island, finalizing paperwork for an estate launch. Her assistant handed her an iPad showing a photo of Nonso holding the repossession letter. He received it? She asked without looking up. Yes, ma. Right on time. Mirabelle stirred her tea gently, the clinking of the spoon the only sound in the room. Let the next notice come on Sunday, just before church. The assistant nodded. Noted. She took another sip of tea, eyes calm, voice soft. A man who strips a woman of her dignity should at least own the ground he's standing on. Now let him feel what it means to be removed. The grand ballroom of the Nigerian Business Roundtable buzzed with tension as Lagos's most powerful CEOs, investors, and elite entrepreneurs gathered under one roof. Nonso wasn't originally invited, but after weeks of spiraling and failed calls, He pulled strings to secure a seat. He had one mission: to get close enough to Mirabelle to apologize, to say something, anything, that might stop the bleeding. His company was now in free fall. 3 more contracts had been terminated. Staff had begun resigning without notice, and his creditors were circling like vultures. He had exhausted his excuses with Temmie, who had since packed up her things and moved out without a word. His pride, now shredded, left only one option: confront the storm he created. When he entered the room, he spotted her almost instantly. Mirabelle, elegant, radiant, commanding, dressed in a soft blue satin gown with an updo that revealed the full majesty of her cheekbones and composure. Everyone moved to her. She didn't chase attention. It bowed to her. Their eyes met across the room. He froze. She didn't flinch. She turned gracefully back to the guest she was speaking with. But Nonso couldn't let it go. He walked toward her slowly, ignoring the whispers that rippled through the crowd. "Mirabelle," he said when he finally reached her. She turned, poised, unreadable. "Yes," she said softly, without warmth. "Please." "Can we talk?" he asked. "Somewhere private?" She tilted her head slightly. "There's nothing private between us anymore." The people around her went quiet. He pressed on, desperate. I didn't know who you really were." "If I had known," her eyes narrowed slightly. "If you had known I was rich, you'd have stayed? But if I were just Amaka, the quiet wife, you'd still throw me out." He swallowed. "I was stupid." "Yes," she said, with a small smile. "You were." The silence was louder than any insult. Then she turned, looked over her shoulder, and added, "Don't confuse my kindness with weakness. You didn't lose a billionaire, you lost a woman who would have helped you become one." And with that, she walked away, head held high, the crowd parting effortlessly for her. Nonso stood there, shattered in silence, finally realizing the truth. She had always been the most powerful person in the room. He just never looked long enough to see it. The early morning Lagos skyline shimmered under a golden hue as Mirabelle sat in the executive suite of Echelon Towers, flanked by her legal and finance team. Before her lay the final contract documents for a mega oil and gas infrastructure project, a 70 billion Nigerian nairas agreement that would not only crown Novacor Holdings as one of the most powerful indigenous corporations in West Africa, but also crush every rival standing in its path. Nonso Swift Move Logistics had been one of the hopeful subcontractors for the project just 3 months earlier. Now, Swift Move was no longer in the conversation, not even as a vendor, not even as a whisper. Mirabelle flipped through the final pages calmly, then signed her name in bold, black ink. "Mirabelle Ochukwananai." Her directors erupted in applause, but she simply smiled, closed the folder, and stood. "Send out the statement." Quietly, she instructed. "We don't need noise to shake the ground." Her assistant handed her a glass of juice. "Your net worth just crossed into the top 3, he whispered. "Officially." Mirabelle didn't blink. "Let it stay unofficial. I'd rather they whisper in awe than shout in envy." Meanwhile, in a modest office in Yaba, Nonso sat alone in a chair with a cracked leather cushion, sweat beading at his temples. The office was smaller than his former walk-in closet. The receptionist had quit last week. The generator had refused to start that morning. And now his last big hope, the oil contract, was gone. Swift Move wasn't just collapsing, it was vanishing. His phone rang, but he ignored it. His email buzzed, and he didn't care. Everything he thought he built was gone. And what haunted him more than failure was how gracefully she did it. Mirabelle hadn't humiliated him in tabloids, hadn't granted a single interview, hadn't gloated. She simply moved. And in doing so, she proved what he had refused to believe. The power had never been his. The very contract he'd boasted about at parties now belonged to the woman he once dismissed as sloppy. And as Lagos erupted with business news headlines, Novacor secures billion-dollar project, the return of Mirabelle Ochukwananai, Nonso sat in his silence. No mansion, no company, no respect. Only one truth remained. He lost the empire by underestimating the Empress. The video appeared suddenly on Instagram and Twitter late one evening. It wasn't from a gossip blog or a scandal chaser. It was from Nonso Okonkwo himself. Seated in what looked like a half-empty room, dressed in a wrinkled white shirt with his eyes sunken and voice shaky, he spoke directly to the camera. To the woman I once called a burden. I owe you more than words can carry, he began. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. I was blinded by my own pride. I mistook silence for weakness, simplicity for shame, and I let the noise of the world drown out the value of what I had. Mirabelle, I'm sorry. The video lasted just under 3 minutes, but it spread like wildfire across social media, WhatsApp groups, and business forums. Some praised him for owning up. Others called it too little, too late. Most just asked, why did he wait until he had nothing? But Mirabelle said nothing. She didn't repost, didn't comment, didn't blink. She didn't have to. Her silence was her response. Because while the world watched a man unravel in public, she had already moved beyond him in private. In a villa tucked away in Banana Island, Mirabelle read the apology transcript on her iPad while sipping a cool glass of Zobo. She was in her loungewear, barefoot, no makeup, no tension. Her assistant entered. Ma, it's gone viral. Should we release a statement? Mirabelle shook her head slowly. What for, she said. Let him speak. Let him grieve. That's his closure. I already had mine the day he shut that gate behind me. Her assistant nodded in silence. But deep inside, even he was in awe of her poise. She hadn't retaliated. She had risen. And now the same man who once called her a nobody in front of staff and friends was reduced to an online apology and lonely rooms. Temi, too, had distanced herself completely. After finding out that the house was never his, the car she drove wasn't his to give, and the lifestyle was borrowed confidence wrapped in arrogance, she vanished from his life. Nonso now lived in a 2-room apartment in Acadia. The driver was gone. The staff had resigned. His reflection in the mirror no longer looked like a CEO. It looked like a boy who lost a kingdom because he was too blind to see the queen already sitting beside him. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the convoy pulled up in front of the sprawling estate in Banana Island. No paparazzi, no press vans, no announcement. Just 3 black SUVs, a security detail, and 1 woman. Mirabelle stepped out, dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair in soft waves. Her face untouched by makeup, yet glowing with grace. The staff lined up as she approached the gates, bowing their heads in respect. This was her new home. Not just a house with walls and chandeliers, but a sanctuary she built with silence, wisdom, and dignity. The mansion wasn't listed under her company name. It wasn't for show or statement. It was peace. She walked through the hallway slowly, trailing her fingers along the freshly polished walls. Every inch of this space was hers, not to impress, but to reclaim what was stolen from her years ago. Herself. As she entered the garden terrace, she paused to take in the breeze. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Nonso. I just want to see you once. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she powered off the phone and placed it gently on the table. There would be no response. Not because she hated him, but because there was nothing left to say. He had already been answered by life. Somewhere in a cramped flat in Acadia, Nonso sat alone on a creaky couch, scrolling through a post about Africa's top 5 hidden billionaires. And there she was, number 3. Mirabelle Obiagela Chukwananai. The woman he had mocked, rejected, abandoned. Now she was everywhere, without ever speaking his name once. Mirabelle stood in her garden and closed her eyes, feeling the sun kiss her face. This was the real mansion, not the structure, but the self-worth she reclaimed, the voice she had found, the power she had always possessed, but had once buried to make a man feel taller. Not anymore. As she turned back into the house, the gates behind her closed, not to keep the world out, but to remind her that what lies ahead would only be built on truth, silence, and strength. And this time, she wouldn't shrink for anyone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and put on post notifications.